The Edmonton Oilers have lost in 2 straight Stanley Cup finals. On today's edition of Locked On Oilers, we explain why, in spite of a lean summer where the roster lost a lot more than it brought in, they have to maintain an all-in mentality.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Wednesday edition of Locked On Oilers. I am your host, Nick Zararis. I am approaching my 4th NHL season as a host on the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been doing digital hockey content for more than 10 years now, and I want to thank everyone that is making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers is a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where we've got your Edmonton Oilers covered every single day. And today's edition of Locked On Oilers is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Football season is right around the corner. College football week 1 this Saturday. Visit the FanDuel app today and start planning your futures bets now. So on today's edition of Locked On Oilers, we are going to walk through why the Oilers have to maintain an all-in mentality. We're going to start in our first segment with something very reminiscent. If you're an everydayer, you heard yesterday's show, we talked quite a bit about the NHL being weak, and that's where we'll start today's show. The NHL being weak as an opportunity for teams to strike at the right time. In our second segment, we will talk about why, as long as you have Connor McDavid and Draisaitl, you really can't take strategic step backward, even if it might make sense in the long term. And then in our final segment, we'll talk about why it would be an admission of failure to meaningfully take a step back consciously in the roster construction. So, to start things out, let me ask you this. I know I can't hear your answer, but do you feel like 32 teams is too many? And for a long time, I have maintained the NHL is already saturated. We can put the conversation as to whether or not the NHL is going to expand. It feels inevitable that a third trip to Atlanta, perhaps Houston, maybe somewhere we're not thinking of, gets a chance to enter the ring. And if you add one, you got to have 2, so you have an even number of teams in the respective conferences. But with so many teams, it is a reasonable question whether there is enough talent to sustain 32 teams. And I have long maintained 32 teams is too many if we want everyone to be competitive. And of course, people will tell you, well, the NHL's goal isn't to have 32 competitive teams. It is to have 32 profitable teams. And that, my friends, is the first point of delineation in this conversation. If the NHL were interested in having 32 competitive teams, we would need more talent. We would need more high-level talent. And as we know, what's the first real benchmark in being a cup contender team? And it's star power. There simply are not enough stars to sustain 32 competitive teams. It doesn't help that some teams, Vegas, Toronto, Dallas, Edmonton, Colorado, I'd venture to say Florida, Carolina, the Rangers even, the Bruins even, teams that weren't particularly good last year in the cases of Boston, New York. You put Vancouver in there as well. Those are all teams that have at least one, if not 2 superstar caliber players. It helps if they're both forwards, like in the case of the Oilers, but you need at least one star forward to get an honorable mention as a playoff team. You know, the Minnesota Wild with Kirill Kaprizov are a good example of this. You have at least one superstar. You should have a chance to make the playoffs, and then you have to deal with teams like, say, Seattle, perhaps San Jose. I know a lot of people are pretty bullish on Macklin Celebrini, me included, but he's not a superstar yet. Connor Bedard, Adam Fantilli, Kirill Marchenko in Columbus as well. That's the conundrum here. If you don't have those stars, you don't get a seat at the table. And the Oilers, by virtue of having Connor and Leon, having 2 of perhaps the 3 or 4 best players in the entire world on the same team, that solves a lot of problems. Because when you think about it from a pure talent perspective, if you could quantify talent as a numerical value, you know, you think about it overalls in a sports video game, and you add Connor's overall to Leon's overall, you're probably not finding a team with 2 forwards whose overalls are pretty close if you add them. Sure, Austin Matthews, William Nylander, relatively close, but not enough where it would be a serious consideration that you would at least debate taking Nylander and Matthews over McDavid and Draisaitl. A year or two ago, you could have maybe perhaps made an argument for Rantanen and McKinnon. Maybe you want to argue Barkov and Tkachuk. I would hear you out, but I think the dynamic upside of Draisaitl and McDavid is a little more valuable, even though Barkov and Tkachuk have obviously won. This is a team sport at the end of the day. And that's really where I wanted to get this conversation rolling. With the Oilers being a consistently good regular season team now for several years, you have that first Stuart Skinner year, you have the last two. With those 3 years as kind of your purview into a range of outcomes where they finished second, they finished third, they've gotten to they've gotten to the Stanley Cup final in years where they didn't have home ice and in years where they did have home ice earlier in the playoffs. So this is a team that on most nights is going to have the two best players in the game in that given game. When the Oilers roll into Columbus, they roll into Pittsburgh, New York, Chicago, Detroit, Carolina. And on most nights, having the best guy in the fight is enough. And that gets me to the Chris Knoblauch mentality and why this is a very logical way. I won't necessarily say the best or most efficient, but I get why the Oilers play the way Chris Knoblauch coaches them. Chris Knoblauch's emphasis on defense, on game control, of putting yourself in an advantageous position comes from somewhere I'm very familiar. So if you know me, if you're an everydayer, you know I like to talk about American football as far as strategy because it's really easy to distill out because it has counters. It's like chess. You do one thing with one piece, the other player is going to do something naturally as a counter. In American football, when you are playing a team that scores a ton of points, there are two schools of thought. A, you try and slow the game down as much as possible. You run the ball a lot, short completions. You want long, sustained 10, 15, if you can even squeeze out 20 play drives to sap the other team of their ability to run up the score. And generally speaking, those teams that score a lot of points, they play at a high tempo. They hit big plays. They're able to score in fewer plays, so it allows them to generate more overall possessions in the game. The Oilers, on the other hand, they look at it from what we were just saying. They want to slow the game down. Their best defense, the Oilers, is not playing defense at all. It's getting the puck out quickly. It's getting the puck down to the offensive zone, sustaining offensive zone time, working a cycle. And we talked about that last year. If you're an everydayer, you heard me talk a lot about the Oilers' evolution from being a transition quick strike offense to a little bit more of a cycle-heavy game. And we all know a cycle-heavy game is not as efficient as far as scoring. The most efficient play is to skate the puck directly to the net yourself and drive the goal. That's why a breakaway is the most valuable scoring chance you can generate as an individual. Yes, the cross seam pass left to right, right to left is the most valuable play typically because you're getting goalie movement and defensive player movement. But when we are talking about it purely abstractly like this, when the Oilers are on their game, they are easily amongst that upper half of the NHL. And that's all you need to make the postseason. And as we have seen, and look, I am not a big proponent of this. I know there are a lot of people who are that do the why not us? All you got to do is play. That's the slogan for the New York lottery here where I live is you never know. Hey, the odds of winning the lottery are pretty close to getting struck by lightning, but it could happen. And that's the way a lot of NHL teams operate. I would point to the New York Islanders under Lou Lamoriello after the 2 conference finals appearances as examples of this. Sure, they make the playoffs. They're pretty good in the regular season. High quality defense, strong goaltending, situational offense, decent power play. And that's enough to get you in the door. Then when you play Carolina, it's not good enough. I think you can make an argument the Rangers to some extent did this, where you rely on Panarin, Shesterkin, Adam Fox. That's enough in the regular season. Against teams where those 3 guys are better than the other team's 3 best guys, that's enough. But when you meet the Tampa Bays and the Floridas of the world, that's where it becomes a problem. And that's kind of where the Oilers are at now, where they have the star power. They've got the 1, 2, 3 down. But as we talked about on yesterday's show, the depth, that leaves something to be desired. We are going to take our first break on today's edition of Locked On Oilers. And when we come back, I'm going to explain why when you have guys like Connor and Leon, you can't take steps back, even if it makes sense. Most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments. And if you don't have the full picture, you can leave money on the table. That's where our friends at Monarch Money come in. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one easy-to-use interface on your laptop or phone. Monarch is built for people with busy lives. If you're putting off organizing your finances, Monarch is here for you. Monarch does all the heavy lifting. You can link all of your accounts in minutes, see clear data visualizations, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. Something Monarch has definitely helped me with is planning a little bit more long-term, putting money aside for big purchases, putting more money aside for my savings, just in case. So if you're ready, this is the opportunity to get your finances under control. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com in your web browser for half off your first year subscription. One more time, it's that good a deal. 50% off your first year subscription at monarchmoney.com with code LOCKEDONNHL. We here at Locked On have an important request. We want to hear from you. We've put together a survey to learn more about our listeners and make your favorite podcasts even better. This is your chance to tell us what you like, what you don't like, and answer questions about our advertising. Go to LockedOnPodcast.com/survey to get started. Everyone who completes the survey will be entered for a chance to win one of 10 $100 Amazon gift cards. Again, that's LockedOnPodcast.com/survey. The link is in the description and the show notes. Thank you for helping Locked On out. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Wednesday edition of Locked On Oilers as we are getting there. And I use getting there as a barometer for the offseason. We are probably about 2 weeks away from guys beginning to show back up in Edmonton, get situated for captain skate, start getting ready for preseason testing. It's late August. We know that Connor McDavid extension is being worked on. The reported term is 4 years. And that is our defined operating timeline. And that is how we will start this second segment. As long as you have Connor McDavid, you cannot consciously subtract from your roster. When you have Connor, when you have Leon, that is enough to justify impulsive or maybe even irresponsible decisions. You can look at a lot of how Peter Chiarelli governed the Oilers before Ken Holland, a lot of the decisions Ken Holland made, and you can look at some of the decisions Peter Chiarelli's made as far as furthering the position right now. So I'm going to ask you guys a question again. I know you can't answer this, but if you know, you can follow along. What are the two most bet football games every week? One is a college game, one is an NFL game. So Saturday nights, about 11 Eastern Standard Time, maybe 12, Hawaii football kicks off. That's one. The other one, Monday Night Football. You know why? Those are your last opportunities to get your money back. On Saturday night, you want to get more money to bet on the NFL, you got to hit the Hawaii game before the Sunday games kick. And then Monday Night Football, that is your last chance to even up before the next week of games, so you have your money again to gamble again the following weekend. Those are the two most bet games, and that's kind of the position the Oilers are in now. The Oilers do not have a choice. If you get McDavid locked in at 4 years or 5 years, whatever it turns out to be, along with Draisaitl, who's going to go for 8, and Bouchard's 4, you are pot committed to being all in for at least the next 4 seasons. There's no ifs, ands, buts. You have those 3 guys, you are going for it. If you are going to pay something in the ballpark of $40 million for just 3 players, you cannot afford to say we are taking a step back. We are tinkering with our roster. We are retooling. We are rebuilding. There are NHL teams that will go their entire existence without ever having a player as good as Connor or as Leon. And that's not hyperbole. And I might upset some people when I say this, but you look at the history of NHL franchises. If you want to give the Kings, the Blues, the Rangers credit for Gretzky, okay, for his moonlighting appearances there, and the game was there for more than a moonlight in LA, but you get what I'm saying here. Most NHL teams will never have a player as good as Connor McDavid or as good as Leon Draisaitl. When you have this caliber of player It is your professional responsibility as a decision maker, whether you're president of hockey operations, general manager. It is your personal and professional responsibility that you give these guys every bit of chance to win the whole thing. And that's why we keep coming back to the idea of, do you have the checklist checked off? That's what we talked about on yesterday's show. The Oilers got that part down. They got the 2 elite centers. They got the elite number 1 defenseman. They have 1 quality supporting star in Zach Hyman. They have 1 above average matchup defenseman in Matthias Ekholm. And then everything else is question marks. I put Ryan Nugent-Hopkins in the fading star tier, where once upon a time he could be depended on. But at this point, I think he's more of a supplementary auxiliary player as opposed to a key piece. Could he serve in, an Andre Palat, Alex Killorn role if we wanted to use the Tampa Bay comp? Could he be... I don't think he's as good as Brad Marchand, frankly. I honestly don't know if Ryan Nugent-Hopkins has ever been better than Brad Marchand right now over the last handful of seasons. This late career evolution from Marchand, really remarkable. And as a brief aside, and I know this is an Oilers podcast, so I won't talk too much about Brad Marchand, but you think about the career trajectory of where Marchand was 15 years ago on that Bruins team that won the Cup against the Canucks to where he is now. It's kind of unfathomable that he went from a rat grinder to being almost a point per game guy at various stages later in his tenure in Boston. The role he played on that Panthers team in the Cup final, on the way to the Cup final, where that third line with him, Lindell, and Luosterainen was incredible. Brad Marchand was the 7th best forward on that team last year. That's the quality of depth we're talking about at the high end. And that's really where the Oilers need to fill in gaps comes into play. And I do think to some extent, the Oilers think that by playing better defense, they can get away with slightly less offensive talent. And sure, I think that is a perfectly reasonable supposition. I like a lot of the ideas here, but at the same time, because of the Oilers' financial position in terms of the salary cap, in terms of the Oilers roster, where they have been leveraged for several years and they have used a lot of draft picks and they haven't been able to draft highly reputable amateur players and bring them along because the time is so pressing to strike now, it's put them in a position where they need to gamble more, where they need to take chances on guys like Ike Howard, why they need to take chances on trading a Ryan McLeod for a Matthew Savoie, because you need to get cheaper and you need to sustain. And that's really the trick here. How do you sustain? And the Oilers are trying to stick the landing. And this is the hardest thing to do in professional sports when it comes to roster construction. How do you maintain a window of contention when you lose your depth? And we see this happen very consistently in these salary cap sports, where good supporting players go to other teams to get bigger roles and more money in free agency because of the nature of the economics of the sport. Your one real chance to cash in is to get to free agency, is to get to the open market and barter your skills for the highest possible earnings you can get. Because a lot of guys, they get there once, maybe twice in their NHL careers, and sometimes that works out for the Oilers, at least in theory. Last year, I was adamantly singing the praises of Jeff Jackson for signing Victor Arvidsson and Jeff Skinner on prove-it deals as veterans who wanted a chance to win and wanted a chance to put up counting stats. I know neither of those moves worked out, but the process there was sound. And that pivots us to the final segment, which is coming up in a minute, where we're going to talk about what it would mean to take a step back. What it would mean to effectively waste a year of Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl in their respective primes at their max earning power right after this quick break. The NFL season is almost here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. I love using FanDuel because it makes it so easy to get in on the action, whether it's before the game starts or with live betting, same game parlays. There are so many opportunities to spice game day up. It's quick, easy, and the best way to add a little bit more energy to game day. If you're ready to play, download the FanDuel app by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Wednesday edition of Locked On Oilers as we address the big picture. And a lot of September is going to be forward-looking content. We'll probably do previews for a majority of the individual players. We'll do full deep dives. We'll explore guys who maybe I haven't talked about as much this summer. We've done a ton on Trent Frederick, on Zach Hyman, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, Adam Henrique. Guys who are poised for bounce backs, guys who need to effectively answer the bell. That joke about the song For Whom the Bell Tolls, or the book, the Hemingway book, For Whom the Bell Tolls. The bell tolls for thee. That's the thing here. The Oilers, within their range of outcomes for next year, can win the Stanley Cup. If they played the season next year 1,000 times, there's probably 50 of those 1,000 where everything breaks right and they win the whole thing. But that is the tantalizing dilemma of roster construction, of trying to have a vision, because you can convince yourself the best possible outcome pretty easily. You think about applying for a job. Of course, I'm going to get this job. I'm well qualified. I wrote a cover letter, even though I don't like doing that. I messaged the person on LinkedIn. I told them how excited I was to apply and how excited I was to hear from them. You don't consider the alternative that you're never going to hear from the job again. Same thing in so many walks of life. You go on a date. Of course, this is going to work out. We're going to start dating seriously, and you never hear from the person again. That is an interesting way, at least, to think about roster construction and to think about vision. Because right now, Stan Bowman is telling you, we know we need more, but this is what we have the money for right now. We had to get rid of guys like Evander Kane. We had to let pieces we liked, like Corey Perry, Connor Brown, leave because we could not afford them. We had to get resourceful. We went to Curtis Lazar. We went the European free agent route. We brought in Andrew Mangiapane because we think he played a small role in Washington. He has top six experience on good teams. The one season in particular in Calgary, his career outlier, his 130-goal season. We think if we put him with Connor McDavid, he's probably not scoring 30, but he can give us 15 or 20. And if we aggregate our way to more offense, to more goal scoring, we will have enough defense and our star power will overcome in a lot of those difficult situations. And that's what the Oilers are telling you. We know our roster is a little more threadbare than it's been the last few years. This team is a lot more reminiscent of the Oiler teams of, say, 2018, 19, and 20, as opposed to the ones of 24 and 25, which the Oilers' depth was one of the calling cards in the postseason over each of the last 2 years. The first time they made the final, it was the penalty kill. It was guys like Henrique, Matthias Janmark, and Connor Brown being able to swing games with shorthanded offense. In this past year, through the first 2.5 rounds, it was the depth. It was that McDavid, Draisaitl, and Perry line. It was Hyman, Nugent-Hopkins, and Evander Kane as a really good high-end second line that was checking the hell out of puck carriers, that was building offensive zone time, that was really cycling the puck heavily. Then you got down the lineup, and they were still getting contributions from guys like Vasily Podkolzin, like Connor Brown. And when you lose depth, you have to find ways to replace it. And of course, you have to prioritize what you spend money on. And the old adage, you get what you pay for in hockey and in life, frankly, is very true. When you are paying top of the market rate, when you're paying McDavid 14, 15 million a year, Draisaitl ditto, Bouchard 10.5, when you are paying top of the market production for your stars and they live up to it, you are showing where your weaknesses are. Because if those guys are playing over their value, McDavid has always given the Oilers excess value, and an uncapped free market where players can make however much they wanted, Connor McDavid be making $20 million for the last 4 years already at this point. He's that good. He's that valuable. But because of the way the salary structures are set up in this league, the Oilers have been great beneficiaries of the fact he's only worth 12.5. Draisaitl at only 8.5 the last handful of years is incredible value in relation to what he could be getting. And the Oilers, at the end of that Ken Holland window, had a nice mix of young guys who were inexpensive, like Holloway, like Broberg. They added pieces like Ekholm and Hyman. They swung and missed on guys like Jack Campbell. They swung and missed on the Nurse extension. But fundamentally, and I don't think I can come up with an example, at least actively, where a team with superstars chose to take a step back. And Tampa Bay had a year in there where they missed the postseason between 2015 and ultimately winning the Stanley Cup. The Bruins had the one in there, of course, famously, where they had the 3 first-round picks. You can point to the Stars, the year they drafted Ottinger, Robertson, and Hintz in the same draft. That is the type of real advantageous luck you need if you want to swing the 1-year retool. And Dallas is still kind of sorting out whatever the core of that group is going to be. We're not that far removed from the Stars thinking they had the group with Sagan Ben, John Klingberg, and the end of Ben Bishop. And slowly but surely that team has transitioned to Hintz, to Robertson, to Heiskanen, Ottinger, Thomas Harley, of course, the trade for Mikko Rantanen. So when you are trying to stick the landing, the more difficult it is, the better the reward, of course. And the other example I can point to is Washington. And the Capitals this past year took a real shot in the dark on a lot of things, whether you want to talk about Pierre-Luc Dubois, the goalie tandem of Logan Thompson, Charlie Lindgren. That's the kind of good fortune you need to break right if you're going to find a way from where you are to where you want to be. It takes a lot. And I don't think the Oilers could realistically sell you on the idea that, we're going to try and recoup some assets and we're going to come back at this in 2026, 2027. There just isn't a way you could rationalize that having a year of McDavid and Draisaitl, because if you have those guys, you can beat anyone on any given night. And yes, that's a foolish way to think about things, but that's the way sports work. You are going to make irrational decisions based on unlikely outcomes because there's a chance. You put McDavid and Draisaitl. I mean, I can still think. I went on a show the morning of Game 6 of the Stanley Cup Final this year, and they asked me who I liked in the game, and I said, every fiber of my being, all of the statistics tell you Florida's been the better team and gotten better as this series has gone along, but the Oilers have McDavid and Draisaitl. The Panthers don't. I think that is enough to will their way over the finish line to get this series back to Alberta and at least get to a Game 7. And the Oilers' depth, the goaltending was not enough. That is the conundrum of hockey being a weakling sport. It's not just enough to have McDavid, to have Draisaitl. You also can't have any glaring holes. You can't have third, fourth, fifth defensemen who get cooked in transition. You can't have bottom 6 forwards who get hemmed in their own end and can't break the puck out. You can't have goalies who play below replacement level in the Stanley Cup Final against great teams. You are reaching an inflection point in this window. And the Oilers have gone through probably, I would say, 3 iterations of the life cycle of the McDavid Draisaitl core. You have that first pocket where they have the nice year in 2017. Ken Talbot makes the 70 starts. They win a playoff series for the first time in 12 years. Then they go through a down spell where they throw a lot of darts at the wall. The team struggles to make the playoffs. That culminates in losing in the qualifying round of the 2020 playoffs. They come back the following year, they make the playoffs, they lose to the Jets in the first round. Then you get Skinner out of nowhere. You go on a nice little run to the conference final. Then you get to the cup final and you lose in the most agonizing fashion. This past year, you're ready to change the ending and your depth comes up a little bit short as your Stars try and do everything they can. The Oilers are in win now mode. The question is, do they have enough talent that they can push even more chips in to keep furthering their probabilities? That will do it for today's edition of Locked On Oilers. Thank you to everyone who made Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers is a part of the Locked On Podcast Network where we've got your teams covered every day. Be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, 5-star review would mean a lot. Very helpful this time of year where we're trying to get the show set up for this upcoming season. If you're over on YouTube, we're inching closer and closer to 2,600 subs. It would be great to get to 3,000 by the end of next year's playoffs. Hopefully, God willing, that's our long-range goal. Be sure to check out Locked On NHL and Locked On NHL Game Night, where they're breaking down all 32 teams ahead of the 2025-2026 NHL season. Be sure to do that Locked On survey. The link is in the comments or in the description for a chance at one of those $100 Amazon gift cards. I will talk to you guys tomorrow. Until then, let's go Oilers.